Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 29th of April, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today are Charles Malet and Vanessa Beeley. Later in the programme, we're going to have a report from Ben Rubin, who's on the ground at the Innovation Zero event in London. Charles will be reporting on the continuing attack on juries and also the latest from Restore. And Vanessa will have a report on Gaza and also the propaganda war in Iran. And I'm going to have some digital ID news, but we're going to begin today with King Charles, of course. Well, King Charles, as everyone will know, is in the United States to show solidarity with a warmongering regime. Yesterday evening, he gave a speech, our time anyway, he gave a speech at a joint session of Congress where he was given multiple standing ovations, and the representatives and senators there fell over themselves to shake his hand. Now, the Green King, of course, is never too far away. And so amongst all the sort of Britain gave birth to the United States rhetoric was this.
So as we look toward the next 250 years, we must also reflect on our shared responsibility to safeguard nature, our most precious and irreplaceable asset. Yet, even as we celebrate the beauty that surrounds us, our generation must decide how to address the collapse of critical natural systems, which threatens far more than the harmony and essential diversity of nature. We ignore at our peril the fact that these natural systems, in other words, nature's own economy, provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security.
I apologize for inflicting that on everybody, but hopefully you saw the comedy value in it. But anyway, what he said there might seem reasonable to some, but never forget that Charles is a major proponent of net zero policy, and we'll be coming back to the issue of net zero in a few minutes' time. But before Charles went to the United States, there were all kinds of concerns expressed that Trump would say something which would embarrass King Charles. I'm not sure what they had in mind, but something maybe about Epstein, perhaps. But as it turned out, it was the British ambassador to the United States, Christian Turner, who seems to have been the main embarrassment for Charles and the trip. He said that America's only special relationship is probably Israel and not the UK. And the FT reports that he also criticised the US political system for failing to hold US associates of Jeffrey Epstein to account. And they quote him as saying that it is extraordinary that the Epstein scandal hasn't touched anybody in the United States. And so the question then is, where is the special relationship? Now, we've discussed that question quite a bit in the past few weeks on this program. Some, including Basil Valentine, believe it no longer exists and that Israel is indeed the key partner. Others lambast Trump and say he's a nutter. Now, General Richard Sheriff is one of those. So we're just going to show this little bit of video that Charles recorded with him recently.
You described Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump as gung-ho nutters, and I don't think anybody listening will disagree with you on that one. Is the United States on our side?
I don't think we can make any assumptions about that under the current leadership. No. I think rather than the benign hegemon, Trump, in his inimitable way, has turned America into a predatory hegemon. And as far as the alliance is concerned, well, only yesterday we hear that Trump has reinforced his previous declarations about potentially pulling out of the alliance. So, no, we can make no assumption that America is on our side now, I'm afraid. I mean, this is an illegal war. It is not our war. It is Trump's war. He's launched it without consulting allies, with no clear idea how the war ends.
Well, I think I can agree with some of what Sheriff is saying there, but I would suggest he's not expressing the full picture. Anyway, King Charles' visit yet again demonstrates, I think, how much the people of the United States bow and scrape as soon as royalty arrives on their shores. But since before Trump's election, my argument has been that the apparent split between the United States and the United Kingdom is a sham. It's an expression of the joint US-UK desire to see European defence become a thing and for Europe to take on Russia. And to evidence that, let's just listen to a discussion with former Trump advisor Mark Lotter on this morning's Radio 4.
I suppose I'm just asking to try and get a sense of whether the British sort of understanding of the relationship is in some way out of date. You know, it's this idea that the phrase even special relationship needs to go because the world's changed.
No, I don't think so. And I've said this even before the visit from the King and the Queen. I believe one of the things that a lot of people are not seeing, the chessboard to say that the president is setting up, is that once this is done with Iran, and as Europe deals with Ukraine, it allows us to shift most of our focus to our true major opponent now on the global playing field, which is China. I think what you're seeing with the president asking NATO to step up and do more, prepare to do more, ready your defenses better, is that with Europe focused on Russia, of course with the U.S. nuclear backdrop and as a backstop, but as Europe does more to confront Russia, we handled the Middle East, we are now shifting a lot of our resources, a lot of our focus to our new greater threat, which is coming from communist China.
So Charles, as in Charles Malet, not obviously. I'm interested to know your thoughts on this because we've been seeing this continuing suggestion of a split represented by Christian Turner's comments and also Richard Sheriff's comments as well, alongside Charles' visit, which I guess offers some reassurance to some that there's no split. And all the while, there's this effort to push the war narrative and to push everyone into getting involved, particularly the Europeans.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. I don't think it's necessarily right to say that everybody's wrong in that all these things can, in some sense, be true at the same time. I think what General Sir Richard Sheriff, who, of course, as a career soldier and as the number 2 command appointment in NATO some time ago as Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, his perspective is in exposing what the special relationship actually means. And, of course, with America holding the power where the British nuclear capability is concerned, the fact that they are in control with regard to much other military hardware, that we are dependent upon them for oil. Effectively, what he's saying is that the United States military will do what they do, absolutely regardless of what the British say or think, or indeed what their capability is. So I agree with you that it's not to say that this is over, that it's necessarily changed, but I think we just have a better idea now of how incredibly imbalanced that relationship actually is. But of course, necessarily, it has to stay close.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that, Charles. Now, let's change topics and move on to net zero, which is what we were suggesting we were going to do. And now this is the Innovation Zero website. And now they claim that they bring together leaders accelerating the electrification, digitization, and industrial innovation underpinning energy security, productivity, and sustainable growth for the future economy. That sounds great. So that's what it says on their website. Anyway, they say their mission is to accelerate a global transition to a low-carbon economy by connecting innovators, funders, policymakers, and business leaders. Now, the Innovation Zero World Conference 2026 is taking place yesterday and today. And we sent Ben Rubin to see what it's all about.
Hey, it's Ben Rubin from UK Column at Innovation Zero World Congress at Kensington Olympia. This is the pinnacle of the public-private marketplace which is being used to drive forward the UK and in fact the global energy transition. All right, the event was founded by Saudi investors a few years ago. That definitely requires a bit more investigation. The headline sponsor is HSBC. There's a lot of money floating around this place, and it's being delivered in partnership with UK Research and Innovation, which is the UK government department responsible for pushing new ideas and technology out into British society. So it's being delivered with the full blessing of the British state. There's some big hitters here yesterday, including Chris Stark, who is the head of mission control for the energy transition in the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, probably the most powerful civil servant in UK government right now. We also heard from Nigel Topping, who is the chair of the Climate Change Commission, and according to the Telegraph, is the most powerful man in the country, which he denied on stage actually. We did ask about that. He was talking about the economic case for change. There's a lot of talk here about the potential for corporate profits, a bit of discussion about reducing energy bills, but I'm not holding my breath, to be honest with you. And actually, I think therein lies the problem. There's a lot of confidence being projected from the stage. There's a lot of networking, a lot of deals being cut, but you get the sense underneath the surface that they've lost the argument and there's a bit of desperation beginning to set in. Now, why might that be? Well, we don't have too long to get into it, to be honest with you. This is just a short report and I could probably stand here all day talking about that issue. But I think one of the things that really grabbed my attention about this place is this building, Kensington Olympia, which was launched, it was opened in 1886 as a place to showcase the technologies of the first industrial revolution and to help project the image and the power of the British Empire. And if we fast forward to 2026, 140 years later, it's essentially doing the same thing today. It's the fourth industrial revolution. It's not the British Empire anymore, it's the Commonwealth and the United Nations system, but underneath, the same things are happening, the same power structures are benefiting, and ultimately a lot of this is just about delivering more power to a political elite and trillions of profit to international capital investors and the City of London. A more detailed report on this will be forthcoming on Monday. See you later.
So thanks to Ben for that. We'll talk about that later on, no doubt, in extra. Charles, let me welcome you back to the programme. And let's move on then to the topic of juries.
Indeed, juries have been in the spotlight necessarily for the last couple of years, but in particular with regard to the threat to their existence, but also the thorny issue of what's described as jury nullification or delivering a perverse verdict. We're going to examine some video footage of an arrest made outside Woolwich Crown Court within the last few days.
Hello. You guys are aware, I think I've probably spoken to you guys earlier, across the road.
This is entirely legal. This is on a crack in the Old Bailey. So,
but hence we placed it, everyone to be on the other side of the road, and that's where it is, and that's the laws, and that's what's in place.
It feels like a very arbitrary decision.
Unfortunately, I'm not the one making decisions. So, I'm just making sure everyone has a safe process.
Okay, well, I'll just sit here.
You won't be able to sit here.
I'm upholding the law. What I'm doing is entirely legal. This is a complete overreach.
They stay away from the officers.
This is a complete overreach. This is absolutely ridiculous. I am merely stating the law. I'm being handcuffed behind my back.
Can you give a search, please?
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. I can hardly believe that this is happening. Why is it that jurors aren't allowed to know about their right to acquit on conscience? There's a High Court ruling about this law, and what's happening in this country? What a complete mess. What a complete mess. The right to a fair trial is one of the basic rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. Jurors need to hear the whole truth, and jurors have a right to acquit according to their conscience.
Now, if you were unable to view the video or indeed hear it because the audio was a bit challenging, it showed a lady being approached by police and subsequently being handcuffed behind her back and lifted into a police van. Now, as a side note, in terms of the way in which that was policed, the officers concerned would have a very hard time justifying their use of force. She presented absolutely no physical threat or risk of harm to either herself or anyone nearby, and therefore it's, at least at face value, entirely inappropriate that she was manhandled and handcuffed in that way. Now, to get to the business of what she was talking about, the reason this is significant is because she is Trudy Warner, and we go back to 2024, where she was, as she said, involved in a case that went to the High Court, and this was due to action taken by the Solicitor General. Before we get into the detail of that, we will just have a look at a video from 2024 as to exactly what it was that was perceived to be the problem for jurors and indeed defendants in courts.
When you see a letter that says Government Legal Department versus Trudy Warner, and when you have an indictment which is 133 pages, it's intimidating.
The legal system is running scared of jury independence because juries are doing their jobs. When juries are allowed to hear the whole truth, they are using their right to acquit. And what Trudy saw was that the juries were acting as the corrective that they're intended to be.
The trials of people who had taken action to expose government complicity in fuel poverty and climate breakdown, Judge Reed goes, there can be no mention of climate change and fuel poverty in this courtroom. And David Nixon, who was on trial, felt he couldn't obey that order. And he used those prohibited words, and on the 7th of February he was sent to prison by Judge Reed for 8 weeks, not for having sat in the road, but just for using those words. On the 3rd of March, Amy Pritchard, Giovanna Lewis, was sentenced by Judge Reed for using the words climate change in his courtroom. He said to Gio, "You did this just to show your disrespect for the court." And Gio said, "No, Judge, that's not true. I did it because your order was crushing my human spirit."
Now, depending on your point of view, given the subject matter just discussed, I would encourage you to consider the principles here rather than the topics. And now we'll just look at a slide from the time on the report. Indeed, the Solicitor General was pursuing Trudy Warner in a case of contempt of court, which of course is a common law offence, the irony of which I will come back to in a minute. But we'll just look at the reporting from the time after the verdict was reached.
British justice has the reputation, of being the sort of most exemplary justice system in the world. And I was seeing things in the courts which made me wonder to what extent the courts were independent. They are subject to slow state administrative violence.
Even the UN Special Rapporteur on Environmental Defenders has to issue a statement to say, "I had not seen a situation as concerning as the one in the UK." The crackdown on protest, he says, poses a severe threat to democracy in the UK.
The judges refused permission for this contempt to be taken forward. That means it ends here and now, and Trudy should face no further action. There is a right of appeal, but they have to base it on a legal principle. I think the judge was entirely correct and a very comprehensive judgment.
Judge Silas Reed said to a jury, "You cannot apply your conscience." Well, that's been struck down. That's completely incorrect. You can apply your conscience. More than that, as an ordinary person, I would say you have an obligation to apply your conscience.
I think this was an attempt by the state to clamp down again on protest. And what's really, really important is that protest isn't a separate category in criminal cases. This is a right that should be given to all juries in all criminal cases.
I hope this is going to make a difference to other people.
So what happened in 2024 was extremely significant, and it highlights the extent to which the system has been manipulated, and in effect, a case has been fabricated against those that would seek to point out what Trudy Warner has. We'll just look at some of the terminology used in the judgment itself, because it does highlight exactly how this has been done. So it's stated by the judge that was running this appeal in the High Court that the Solicitor General seeks permission to bring proceedings for contempt against Trudy Warner. The claimant, being the Solicitor General, alleges that Trudy Warner is in contempt at common law through conduct which was a direct interference with the administration of justice and undertaken with an intention to interfere with the administration of justice. So strong words there. And again, it's alleged by the claimant that the contempt, the amount that this amounts to contempt, and that's not in dispute. However, later on in the judgment, the significant point is that the judge in the High Court says that he rejects the arguments made by the Solicitor General in that Trudy Warner confronted jurors and that she followed two suspected jurors to intercept them. These submissions significantly mischaracterize the evidence. And he goes on to say, in my judgment, it is fanciful to suggest that Ms. Warner's behavior falls into this category of contempt. The category is limited to threatening, intimidatory, abusive conduct or other forms of harassment. Now, this, as I say, forms part of a campaign, which of course is led really by Brian Leveson, Lord Leveson, who's just recently, well, relatively recently released part one of the review into the independent review of the criminal courts. And this is effectively finding a solution to a problem that does not actually exist in terms of the efficiency of the system. And I would encourage you to go and look at some UK column content on this. A recent blindfold briefing on perverse verdicts that I wrote a couple of months ago, and indeed in the latest issue of the Column magazine, Brian Gerrish has written a very long and noteworthy article about exactly this topic. So I really would encourage you to get into that because it's an extremely significant issue. Mike, I don't know if you've got any comment to add to this or whether we hold that back for extra.
Well, we'll mostly discuss it extra. I would applaud Trudy for everything that she's done. If I'm allowed to make one slight criticism, it's that we shouldn't really be relying on the European Convention for Human Rights, particularly with respect to juries, since it certainly was not that document which introduced juries in the first place. And bearing in mind that European countries are probably the worst example of the use of juries to be found on the planet. So I would just encourage anybody that is taking the stand to do so on the basis of our own common law documentation and Magna Carta, for example, and start there. But we'll talk more about that in extra. Vanessa, let's move across to you and welcome you to the program. We haven't heard about Gaza quite so much in the last number of weeks. Just bring us up to date.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to circle back to Gaza today, despite the fact that there is still an awful lot of other things going on across the region. But the genocide, of course, is ongoing. People living in appalling, abject conditions, most of them in tents or in buildings that have already been at least partially destroyed or in danger of collapsing on their heads. But now there is even a new terror that is basically preying on them. And this is the fact that due to the lack of proper sanitation, the Gazan tent camps are being overrun by rodents. Basically, rats and weasels were actually mentioned in this report, are entering people's tents at night. They're taking up home in the bathrooms and the latrines. Children are actually being attacked by the rodents, which they're saying are huge, which of course I will leave it to people's imagination as regards what they're feeding on. But of course, this also leads to the risk of leptospirosis, which in conditions like this is very likely to cause multiple deaths. It's going to affect the already poor supply, scarce supply of clean water, of course, because they will, through their urination, they're going to further contaminate the water supplies. And also they're stealing, again, the very scarce supplies of food. Now, the following video is very short. If people have a bit of a horror about rats, I suggest they look away. I am not someone that is particularly fond of them either, but this is just in one of the tents. You can see the number of rats that have actually entered the tent where people are sleeping, including children in, as I said, appalling conditions. And then if I just want to show this is a recent video taken by an Israeli soldier filming for himself the absolute devastation in Gaza, the total destruction of homes and civilian infrastructure. It's very hard to even imagine. I mean, I was in Gaza in 2012. I can't even work out where that is in Gaza. The destruction is so catastrophic. And this is where people are trying to survive and live with all of these added appalling conditions that are affecting and impacting on their ability to survive. Now, we can move on from that to the next image, which will demonstrate basically this is one of the towers. This was basically taken from a post on X by someone living in Gaza. And he said there are families living in this tower. The civil defense organizations have said to them, you must leave, because basically the tower is collapsing from the various bomb strikes that have hit close to and around it. But they're unable to. There's nowhere else for them to go, basically. And then I wanted to look at this. This is the yellow line that Israel has created inside Gaza, which, of course, has stolen 58% of the Gaza Strip, pushing the 1.52 million Palestinians into an area which is lacking in natural resources. It's lacking in the most abundant agricultural areas of Gaza, which are occupied by the Zionist forces, pushing them onto the coastal area. And then, according to multiple reports, they're being preyed on by drones on a daily basis. And I just wanted to show this promotional clip from Elbit Systems that are, of course, that have been targeted by Palestine Action, and as I will demonstrate, by other groups that are now coming to prominence in the UK. So let's just have a look at this promo video. So people are effectively being hunted down all along that strip of yellow border in Gaza. This was a drone attack back on April the 8th, which targeted the Al Jazeera journalist that you can see in the caption there, Mohammed Washar, was killed in this targeting. And this is on a daily basis. If you just do a search on X for drone strikes in Gaza, you'll see that. And then if we move on, this is a video from a recent action taken by a new group called People Against Genocide. This is just a part of the report that they made on entering one of the Elbit Systems companies in Leicester.
On the roof of UAV Tactical Systems in Leicester. If you're a member of the amazing Leicester community, get down here and support us as soon as you can. For those that don't know, UAV Tactical Systems produces military equipment, including drones. It's owned by Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest weapons manufacturer. Elbit Systems proudly supplies the so-called IDF with its military equipment, with the majority of its weapons. And that's why we're here. We are fucking sick and tired of our government's collaboration in this genocide that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people.
So I think despite the action taken against Palestine Action, of course, which was deliberately intended to intimidate any other activists coming to the fore and continuing the work, that has failed. And this is in Germany that I found just when I was looking through some headlines. So again, activists accused of raiding the Israeli weapons factory face trial in Germany. And again, this is attacking the Elbit Systems subsidiaries in Germany. So resistance continues.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. We'll talk more about that in extra, amongst other things. Let's come back to the UK then, Charles, and bring us up to date. Local elections, of course, coming up very, very soon, but bring us up to date with what Restore is doing.
Well, exactly as you say, Mike, with the local elections coming up in many parts of the country next week, there has been considerable attention on the home front. Now, with specific regard to Restore, the new political vehicle of Rupert Lowe, who has very much characterised himself, who is not cut from the same cloth as mainstream politicians, in that he does not kick political footballs about the place and do that which is primarily politically expedient. At least that's the reputation that he aims to trade off. But increasingly, his statements and the party's rhetoric looks like that is exactly what he is doing. We have a tweet here from the last couple of days. Restore Britain would abolish the asylum system. Now, this has to be set against the statistics provided by the Refugee Council, who claim that within the last year, 89,000 asylum applications have come in. Now, it's notable that Restore and Lowe have completely ignored the figures from Ukraine, the Migration Observatory reckoning that there are now, due to the British government's policy and the visa scheme for Ukrainians, in the region of 264,000 Ukrainians in the country. But Lowe has only ever referred to boots on the ground in Ukraine and never ever to the policy concerning migration. Now, this is significant. With regard to other issues, he has tweeted recently, real feminists back mass deportations. Now, of course, what he's inferring there is that the spectre of sexual violence from somebody who might be Muslim and dark-skinned is somehow worse than it might be from somebody else. With regard to specific policy, and as I say, he's obviously ignoring the policy decision made on Ukraine. Policy papers are fairly thin on the Restore website. Only 4 so far, one of which is restoring the British pub. Now, I'm not pulling that out to be facetious, but the point is that, of course, the British pub in recent years has become very much dependent upon migrant employment in the hospitality industry, something that would seem to undermine the Restore policy. Now, the latest target, and I do choose the word deliberately, seems to be the 2.2 million veterans in the country who, of course, can and will be weaponised by whichever government takes aim at them. And just the day before yesterday, I think, a Restore Britain government will immediately run a fast-track recruitment campaign to bring thousands and thousands of British military veterans into immigration enforcement roles. And then, somewhat menacingly at the bottom, field roles. And this is almost to suggest that veterans will be brought into some sort of a scheme where they are going around the countryside and actually winkling asylum seekers or migrants out of wherever they might be living in order to perhaps forcibly deport them. It is, of course, hard to tell with a short and bland statement like that exactly what is meant by it. But the reason I highlight that is because this government, and indeed the last, has been pushing very hard to capture the many, many veterans in the form of digital identity with the veteran's identity card. And given the way in which Restore has, in a way, followed exactly the line that's taken by other parties on so many of these issues, and not, in fact, stuck to the line that Lowe puts out about himself, it seems reasonable to ask whether, in setting up a system for both migrants, asylum seekers, and veterans, whether in actual fact this is all pointing towards exactly the digital infrastructure that he says he wants to resist.
Very good points, Charles. Thank you for that. Now let's move on then. If you like what the UK column does, we do need your ongoing support. Please have a look at the website and you can find options for helping us. Join us as a member if you possibly can. You could pick up a copy of the column, which is our new quarterly magazine, and this is the first issue out over the last couple of weeks. Do pick up a ticket for the 20th anniversary event. Let's just have another look at the promotional video for this.
UK Column is 20. For 20 years, we've been the antidote to mainstream propaganda, the most established online alternative news organisation in Britain. Join us as we mark this momentous occasion, celebrating everything UK Column's achieved in the beautiful location of Plymouth. We have 3 days of amazing speakers, presentations and stories, plus music, fun, friendship and prize giving. We would love you to be there. Grab your ticket at the UK Column shop and be part of this wonderful anniversary weekend.
Thanks, Gemma, for that. And now let's have a look at what went out yesterday. If you haven't seen the interview between Diane and Catherine Gunn, that's on the UK Column website. Do have a look at that if you are interested. Jerem tonight is discussing Stalin and whether everything that we were told about Stalin is wrong. And Carl tonight is talking to senior fellow at CIGI about Paul and Palantir, how oligarchs captured America and what comes next. Tomorrow at 1 p.m, Vanessa will be very pleased to know that finally we're putting out the next edition of the Syria podcast, episode 10. Vanessa and I were joined by Miriam Charabati from Lebanon. Interesting conversation, Vanessa.
Yeah, very. Always good to get a perspective of people, of course, from the region, and Miriam's is very seeped in contextual history. Well worth listening.
Absolutely. So that goes out at 1 p.m. tomorrow, and it'll, of course, be available on demand immediately afterwards. And then another article on the UK Column website you might be interested in, The Fog Machine at Palantir. This is by Christopher Hill. This is hugely interesting. Topic, of course, is absolutely obvious. It's another look at Palantir. To have a read at that and share it as widely as possible. Now let's come on to the issue of digital ID. Now on the 24th of April, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee announced 5 new inquiries, including one into the proposed digital ID scheme. Now they're saying that they're going to scrutinise spending and delivery of the scheme. And as everybody knows, Starmer intends to launch this by the end of the current Parliament in 2029. The exact dates are not quite known yet. Now, the Public Accounts Committee previously examined the failed UK government Verify programme in 2019. And they say in their introduction here that while the UK uses a range of digital identity services, it does not currently operate a national ID card or single citizen identifier scheme. And they say in September 2025, the Prime Minister announced a new digital ID scheme with a target to launch by the end of the Parliament. In January 2026, it was further announced that digital ID would not be mandatory, but would become one of a number of ways in which people would be able to prove their right to work. So that's what they're saying about it. Of course, the messaging from the government about whether this is actually going to be mandatory or not is still a bit woolly, shall we say. But in parallel with this announcement, the Ada Lovelace Institute has published this as they try to work out if the public will buy into Starmer's scheme. And they're saying, like other common law countries, the UK has no mandatory identification documents, and that identification is by consent. This means that people do not expect to be challenged to prove who they are, and do expect to produce documentation only to prove entitlement, e.g. for accessing public services. Now, the Ada Lovelace Institute worries that a shift towards digital ID is not a neutral administrative upgrade, but a change in the underlying relationship between a person and the state. And they say that trust is hard to build, easily lost, and hard to regain. Now, aside from the idea that the whole thing won't fly, none of the commentary seems to address the issue of whether or not governments or any other entity, for that matter, can keep people's data safe, and therefore keep people safe from identity theft. And that is an often missed concern, aside from all the others that are mentioned. We'll talk more about this at another time. Now, let's come back to Vanessa then. And Vanessa, the propaganda around Iran and the efforts to keep the war going, well, they don't end.
No, they don't. But what is interesting, we've been talking for some time at UK Column about the fact that the riots back in January were orchestrated by Mossad and CIA. And this is now confirmed by Hebrew media. This was in Ynet this morning. It's translated from Hebrew, which I always find throws up some quite strange English phrases, but it basically says the absolute victory that never happened. This is how the operation to overthrow the Iranian regime has been torpedoed, in brackets, for now. And they talk about influencing the system, funding the protests, eliminating the leaders, triggering the Kurdish separatists in Iraq to attack Iran, pushing the Iranians onto the streets to force regime change. It was actually in the end prevented by J.D. Vance, who didn't approve the use of the Kurds, and by Erdogan in Turkey, who also, of course, didn't want any kind of amplification of the Kurdish cause because that would impact on Turkey. And if we go back to the text in the article itself, what they actually say is a regime can be overthrown from above by relying on senior officials, and it can be overthrown from below by fostering mass protest. Of course, this is very much what they tried to do in Syria. The very strange phrase, it would both stuff the chicken's head and cook its legs. I have no idea how that is translated from Hebrew, but I think you get the picture. And it does, what is interesting, it says the organization which was set up to effectively push through this strategy was established 4 years ago, which of course is when the Mahsa Amini riots began in 2022 in Iran. So it's been working on this destabilization from within for some time. And then if we look at what they claim to be the 3-day assessment, so they underestimated the survival ability of Iran. Even with the assassination of the leadership, they still managed to replace the leadership and continue fighting back against the two nuclear states that were effectively leading the aggression. They underestimated the power of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. They claim that the US was not prepared, but they are saying we don't understand how that is possible because they were being warned by intelligence advisors within the US that the Strait of Hormuz could potentially be closed. And then, of course, there's a jibe there at the end about Keir Starmer saying that he failed to come to the assistance of President Trump, which was another element in the failure of the campaign, and the fact that Trump, of course, thought it would all be over within a few days. And then if we go on to basically, this was set up by the Cradle. This was a post by the Cradle, I think it was yesterday. So it says, Israel-based generative AI for good. A lot of people have responded to that and said it should be for evil. Founded by Sherian Miamdovsky-Shomek, has produced an AI-generated video depicting a supposed Iranian sexual violence survivor for war propaganda purposes. The video was actually established before the war began against Iran. It's framed as being based on actual testimony, yet there's no verifiable evidence provided to support that claim, risking serious doubts about its authenticity and intent. She has previously been associated with creating similar AI-generated content alleging sexual violence linked to October the 7th, which has also faced scrutiny over a lack of substantiation. There is multiple documentation of that. So let's just have a look at this video to see how effective it is.
همه رو یادمه تیراندازی خیلی شدید من دستگیر شدم داخل یه دونه ون منو بردن هر کدوممون گروهی به صورت 7-8 نفری میبردن توی اتاق من فکر کردم میبرم فقط کتک میزنم 7-8 نفر ما رو بردن به صورت گروهی به همون تجاوز میکردن.
I would point out, and many people did point out on X, of course, who is the country that is effectively defending people against prosecution for rape of Palestinian prisoners in the State Amman jail. There is an obsession with the subject of rape with these AI-generated videos that are being put out to criminalize target organizations like Hamas or countries like Iran. So who is producing these videos? It's an organization called Generative AI for Good. Let's have a look at their partners. So they're partnered, you can see immediately, they're Microsoft and Meta, that we know are pretty much surveilling and controlling so-called free speech across the majority of social media apps, including, of course, WhatsApp. Now, the flagship initiative, according to their own website, if we can just have that up. So we've mentioned the CAO. Her flagship initiative, Hearing Their Voices, uses AI avatars and voice technology to safely preserve and share testimonies of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence from Iran, Israel, October the 7th, Syria, Ukraine, Iraq, and beyond. Launched at the United Nations, the project won the inaugural SEMA Impact AI Award. So effectively, we're being given testimonies that are effectively deep fake, and we're being told we have to believe them without any substantiation whatsoever. We're entering very dangerous territory here. And then I looked further into the website. I do intend doing a more in-depth investigation into them. But this is another element of their work or their projects, Hack the Hate. Again, I would point to the hack element of that, because we know from former Mossad director Yossi Cohen that every phone in the world has a bit of Israel in it. And this is a speaker at this event who belongs to the Unit 8200 Alumni Association. Now, what is very interesting to me, if we then look at the impact of this part of their projects, we see there that Israel leads with this tax. So this basically, to me, means that Israel is going to be leading with this kind of deep fake evidencing or justification for war, for destabilization, for cracking down on dissidents. And then I wanted, sorry, if I can just go back to that for 1 second. When they talk about start of a movement, look at the image they're using and compare it to the one on the right. The one on the right is of Otpor. That was an orchestrated movement that brought down President Milosevic back in 2000, funded by Soros, by the National Endowment for Democracy, for US aid, by US aid. So effectively a CIA orchestrated movement that has then been repeated in Syria, in Ukraine, and in Iran. So very interesting symbolism going on there. And then I just wanted to have a look at this 8200 Alumni Association. So obviously it preserves the legacy of Unit 8200. It supports graduates and so on. So very much, again, we're seeing an Israeli-based company producing the deep fake videos and evidence that is going to be used, as I said, for nefarious purposes, with, again, that Unit 8200 tentacle heavily embedded within it.
Yes, okay, Charles, a related topic, because the diaspora in the UK has been, well, we've seen the footage of them outside with the Israeli flags and so on, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a very confused picture. And in actual fact, when we talk about Iranian diaspora, I don't just mean in the UK, but there is a particular reason for looking at this now. Of the many voices calling for a change to the situation in Iran, a change to the government, a change to the regime, one has just had an interaction described as being at the UK Parliament, which took place yesterday. So we just put that on screen now, a conference to stop executions in Iran and to support the NCRI. Now, that's the National Coalition of Resistance of Iran. and to support what's being described as a provisional government. Now, the reason that this came about is because of the presence of Maryam Rajavi, and she is described, or describes herself, as the president-elect of the NCRI for the period to transfer sovereignty to the people of Iran. Sorry, I misspoke. I meant National Council. We'll just listen to what it was that she actually said.
Honorable dignitaries, when Western governments do not speak a single word in response to these daily executions, it is the Iranian people and political prisoners who pay the price. If European governments adopt their policy without recognizing the need for regime change in Iran, they will, in practice, be siding with religious fascism. Since 2010, we have repeatedly stated the Revolutionary Guard Corps must be designated as a terrorist organization. We hope that the legal obstacles to this decision will be removed as soon as possible. We call on European governments, and especially the United Kingdom, to condition their relations with the regime on the halt of executions of political prisoners and the killing of protesters, to bring the regime's leaders to justice under universal jurisdiction for more than 4 decades of genocide and crimes against humanity, and to recognize the provisional government declared by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Thank you all.
Now, obviously, she wasn't in Parliament. She, in actual fact, is based in France, but obviously there you heard her calling explicitly for regime change, and indeed following exactly the same line put out by the Tony Blair Institute in 2023, which is to call for the proscription of the IRGC. So if we just put that on screen, please. That's from, as I say, from 2023. Now, what makes her point interesting is to go back to 2016 and look at the briefing paper from the House of Commons Library on the People's Mujahideen of Iran, the PMOI, also part of the substructure of the umbrella organization that's now represented by the NCRI. And in particular, we look to the text saying that the PMOI, or the Mujahideen-e-Khalq MEK, is a group of exiled Iranians opposed to the government of Iran. It's a member of a wider coalition known as the National Council of Resistance in Iran, and they were put on the government's list of prescribed terrorist organizations in March 2001. And it goes further. Although the PMOI was removed from the UK's prescribed organisations list a few years later in 2008, leader Maryam Rajavi has been refused a visa. In 1997, the then Home Secretary excluded Mrs. Rajavi on the ground that her presence would not be conducive to the public good for reasons of foreign policy and in light of the need to take a firm stance against terrorism. Well, one might ask, what has changed? And there's just one more bit of text here. The Home Secretary arguing that permitting Rajavi to enter the UK would be perceived as a deliberate political move against Iran, and that this risked destabilising relations between the UK and Iran, which would be detrimental to UK national security interests. So, of course, the wind has changed direction. And if you're wondering from what quarters this does have support, I'm just going to play a short clip of the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, addressing his issue, or at least his criticism of Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah.
Mr. Pahlavi cannot be accused of too much arduous work over the decades. He was born into enormous wealth and privilege. He scuttled off to the United States 4.5 decades ago. I'm not aware of anything useful he's done since, but apparently he goes to bed at night, my source tells me, eagerly entertaining the hope that the moment is nigh. The prince over the water, who will come to the rescue and achieve a position of leadership. Mate, you are deluded. In political terms, you are off your chump. You haven't got a clue. It's not going to happen. The idea that the mass of the people of Iran are going to say to the son of the most appalling autocrat who pillaged the country and presided over mass destruction, please, sir, we know you haven't got much of a curriculum vitae. We know you haven't done much by way of effective work in your life, but we'd really like you to be our next leader. Mr. Pahlavi, it isn't going to happen. Do something else.
I don't want to oversimplify things, but in effect, what's being called for has great parallels with what has happened in Syria over the last couple of years. I'm going to invite Vanessa to comment on that in just a second. But before I do, just so that people are aware of the influence that the NCRI is able to exert in Parliament, we just look at a recent announcement from MP Bob Blackman about the choice for Iran is not chaos, but a transition from dictatorship to democracy. Of course, Berko, we heard there, no connection to Iran. He is Jewish. And indeed, Bob Blackman is, of course, a conservative friend of Israel. So, Vanessa, I'd just like your comment on specifically the relationship between the NCRI and Israel, and indeed the parallels with HTS and Jelani.
Well, yeah, I mean, effectively, we're just supporting another terrorist group that has committed massacres in Iran against the Iranian people, majority civilians, that has been designated a terrorist organization. And by the way, I thought that one of the biggest criticisms of Iran was the wearing of the hijab. And yet here we are bringing in yet another hardline organization similar to Jelani in Syria that is now inflicting sort of draconian measures on a secular Syria. And here we are again supporting an organization which is effectively going to, again, take Iran back to the Dark Ages. It's sheer lunacy. I mean, I don't understand how they're spinning this one, because the connections to MEK with Israel, with the CIA, are undeniable on this and historically very well known.
And completely ignored by the British administration at the moment because that's what suits them. Vanessa, thanks very much. We'll talk about that more in Extra.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Vanessa. Now, on Monday's news programme, Brian covered the story of Mark Bullen, a former Hertfordshire police officer who he has become the first British-born person to have his citizenship revoked, in this case over links to Russia. I just wanted to very briefly mention that the Trump administration, well, they announced this a year ago, but they are making good progress on it. They announced they were instructing the US Citizenship and Immigration Service field officers to refer at least between 100 and 200 denaturalization cases per month to the Department of Justice during the course of 2026. And so recent coverage on this is demonstrating that this is moving on quite nicely. Thank you very much. And they are on track with around 400 people so far having their citizenship, or at least in the process of having their citizenship removed. They are, of course, people that have come to the United States and have obtained citizenship since they arrived, but the state's government has decided that it's time for them to leave. So, the question is, where does that leave them as individuals, and are they being left stateless? This is something that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more in Extra. But Vanessa, let's just finish on a slightly lighter note.
Yeah, I just wanted to point this out to everyone and recommend that they follow a group of young Iranians that have established a little kind of AI animation company called Explosive Media. And they've been putting out some very funny, very good animated Lego videos of Trump and the whole scenario. So just play a section of their latest one, which is the first one with music, which might not appeal to everyone, but go with it. It's good fun.
That U-turn, homie, completely lost the fight. $1 million toys, but you're running from the cloud. World is asking if the gate is open, yes or no. looked him in the eye and told him what I saw. Wait a minute, homie. I said, Inshallah. Little orange man, this is straight up Iran. Little orange man, Iran. Little orange man, get straight out of Homer's little orange man. Get out. Little orange man, this is straight up Iran. Little orange man, Iran. Little orange man, get straight out of Homer's little orange man. Twitter finger king, fake ring cap, master with the lies. Always tweeting great success while your whole damn squad cries. Talking smack to the Pope, throwing shade at Spain. But you a guppy out, he hit the Persian rain. Got an eagle made of glass, roasting on the holy sea.
Well worth watching the whole video, but I think they're excellent. And considering they're probably doing this on a shoestring, they deserve supporting.
I think we need to see much more of this kind of Mickey taking of what's going on in the world, and just it definitely helps bring the message home. Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Charles. Thanks to everybody that's watched this edition of UK Column News. If you're a UK Column member, stick around for Extra. We'll be back in a few minutes for that, so stay on the live stream. Don't forget the interviews tonight with Jerem and Carl, and then tomorrow my discussion with Vanessa and Miriam. We will see you at 1 p.m. again on Friday as usual. See you then. Bye-bye.